Welcome back, everyone. Hope you got your coffee, tea, or water and are ready for our second learning session, which will be led by Cliff Williams, advisor, TMS Asset Management, Inc. He will speak about asset management and the MRO world. What are they and how are they connected? Cliff is an award-winning author of the best-selling maintenance novel, People, a reliability success story. He is a maintenance educator and a keynote speaker at conferences around the world who believes success is achieved through people. Cliff has had a successful career in maintenance, reliability, and asset management, spanning 4 decades and industries from steel, pulp and paper, and food and beverage. He has recently retired as the corporate maintenance and reliability manager for a Canadian-based chemical manufacturer, where he guided the performance at 10 facilities. Currently, Cliff enjoys sharing his knowledge and experience as an advisor on maintenance and reliability for People and Processes, Inc. and asset management with TMS Asset Management, Inc. After Cliff has finished his presentation, we'll open the virtual floor for questions. As a reminder, if you have questions during or after the presentation, please post them in the Zoom questions box below. Over to you, Cliff.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Thank you, Mario. It's good. So I'm just going to share my screen and bring up some slides, and then we can make a start. So here we go. There we go. So we're off and running. Asset management and the MRO world. What are they? How are they connected? And we have 2 challenges. One challenge is that if we ask 20 different people, we'll probably get about 20 different answers to that question. Certainly you'll get a different answer from people who are in North America versus, say, Australia and the UK. You're going to get a different answer from people who are working in the public sector versus private industry. They're going to be different answers. You're going to get mine this afternoon, and I'll explain my perspective on this, and you can build on that. The second one is that it could take a day and a half to actually go through and explain what they all are. And so we're going to make some assumptions that those of us that live in the MRO world understand a little bit about MRO. And we'll focus a lot more on asset management and try and get the intent of asset management, and especially as driven by ISO 55000, try and get that across so that we will have a common ground and a common understanding when we move forward. As Mario said, just retired from working with a Canadian chemical manufacturer, and we always start our meetings, our presentations, everything with a safety moment. And so I'm doing a safety moment again. And this gentleman obviously went to the school of do what I say and not what I do. And it kind of brings us to the point that W. Edwards Deming made, where he said, you know, you should remove banners and exhortations because they cloud the intent. And where this kind of fits into this discussion is that when we were discussing with a number of the ISO 55000 team, that the team that developed ISO 55000, their comments were that if all you do and in getting certified with ISO 55000 is so that you can fly the ISO flag outside your facility, then you are totally missing the point. And even though they were the ones that developed 55000, they were quite honest and said they would much prefer that a company took the intent of 55000 and enacted it, rather than certify to 55000 and not enact it. And it's the same with this, is, you know, if we're not going to do what we say we're going to do, if we're not going to do what with the exhortations, then it really loses the point and we miss out on all of the great benefits that we can have. So very simply, okay, let's have a look at maintenance, you know, and this is the definition that I use. So this is where hopefully we have some agreement in that this is in existence. Okay, the activities required undertaken to conserve nearly and as long as possible the original condition of asset, equipment, or resource while compensating for normal wear and tear. We're going to try and keep it running as long as we possibly can. And how are we going to do that? These are the types of things that we really should be doing currently, irrespective of whether you're looking to certify to 55,000. These are just MRO world kind of activities where we do the no planned identified, often known as run to failure, just and run to failure is okay as long as it's justified and understood and analyzed and decided upon. And then preventive maintenance, again, a myriad of definitions. The one I prefer is it's frequency-based, and if we're going to use that, then we really need to ensure that we do have predominant wear-out patterns. Then predictive maintenance or condition-based maintenance, and that's where we look at those random frequency failures, and we look at our equipment and our assets and understand how they are performing and understanding the health of the assets. And then the proactive maintenance, and again, myriad of definitions. My definition is manage the environment and conditions that might lead to failures. Could be housekeeping, it could be how we have cleanliness, it could be how we really manage the area, are they water where it shouldn't be? Do we have heat where it shouldn't be? Can we manage the environment so that those failures that we see actually don't occur? And as I said, this is what you need to be doing, irrespective of whether you're looking at having asset management and ISO 55000 or whichever way you want to go. And then operations, the use and correct operation, and that really, those are the key words, the use and correct operation. Too many times we see that we don't necessarily operate equipment. We do get-arounds, we do jerry-rigging, we run equipment at a rate it's not designed for, and wonder why we have these maintenance issues and all these problems. So good operation is the correct operation, and using the raw materials and being able to consistently provide what's required. And it really is, can we deliver what we are required to deliver at the cost that it's supposed to be delivered? And that really means that we look after raw materials and all of the others. And do we have the required quality? Are we having rejects? Are we having rework or any of those things? So again, these are the things that we should be doing, irrespective of whether we're looking to go to asset management or ISO 55000. So these are the things that, if you're not doing them now, these are the things you need to focus on before thinking about asset management or ISO 55000. And then there's the stores and supply chain, and we kind of all know the problems that can exist if we don't do this correctly, if we don't get this right. This is key part of our current MRO world, is that we have the parts that we need when we need them, at the lowest possible cost to the organization. We don't want to stock, so many things that, we're running a kind of a loss situation in the stores. The number that gets thrown out in the maintenance reliability world is that, the cost of maintaining something on the shelf in the stores is about 25% of the original purchase cost. So it's that type of scenario where, again, in today's scenario, we need to be doing this properly. We need to make sure that we have what we need on the shelf when we need it, and we don't have parts sitting there for years and people not even remembering what they were supposed to be used for. So that's really what we need to do. So again, these are the three things that the actual doing doesn't change. We have to do these things properly in asset management. So if we're not doing these things properly and we have problems with any of these three things, we need to fix these first before we start to look at how can we make this journey into asset management. Maybe if you understand that you do have problems with them, it becomes part of the journey to asset management. So this is the kind of model that I've seen. It's kind of model that I've worked under, and not afraid to admit it, but it's where current management will give the goals and the directions, the targets, to the operations group. They'll then give them to supply chain, and then they'll then give them to maintenance. The challenge is that they are done in isolation. And so when maintenance gets its goals, it doesn't understand operations goals. And operations and maintenance don't understand supply chains challenges. And supply chain doesn't understand what happens with maintenance. And this is, unfortunately, in my experience, a typical scenario that I've seen and exists, and really was one of the drivers for the birth of asset management. So let's talking about that, let's look at the evolution of asset management. First sort of inkling of the idea that people weren't managing their assets correctly or effectively was through a disaster in the North Sea. And it was the Piper Alpha that really got governments looking at the UK government looking at, what went wrong and what happened. And there was a number of things that caused failures of communications, no real documentation, a whole bunch of things. But the sad part of this is that there were 167 people that died. And, that's a terrible consequence for not managing our assets the way that we could, should, or maybe, would have if we'd have understood the consequences. That started it all. But then in the late 90s to early 2000s in the UK, there was a change in the ownership of infrastructure. Up until the 90s, and it was Margaret Thatcher that started the process where up until that time, the British government owned industries. The steel industry, which I came from, was owned by the British government. It was a nationalized industry. The coal industry was nationalized industry. Hydro was nationalized. Gas, water, all of these things were owned by the government. And in the 90s and 2000s, they were sold off to private enterprise. And what happened was that people saw that, okay, there were brownouts, blackouts, there were, no water available. And again, it took an unfortunate incident that cost lives, where we had rail failure and lives were lost, for the UK government to step in again and say, okay, we seem to have, divested these industries, and the people that own them are not operating them and certainly not managing them the way that they need to. And so they enacted a publicly accessible specification, PAS 55, and it was enacted, and it kind of described physical asset management. and described how these organizations should be managing their assets and utilizing their assets. It was so important to the UK government that when these companies went to the UK government and looked for increased rates, they were told that they, in fact, had to be sort of recognized as embracing PAS 55, or they would not get the permission to increase their rates. So all of the infrastructure, rail, all of these people really took up asset management as described by PAS 55, and it was revised in 2008. It was looked at, so it was understood that this was a work in progress. Outside of the UK, Australia were really looking at deteriorating assets, and the utilities, the infrastructure, and the roadways. And so they were looking for something that would help them make their infrastructure and their utility groups and theirs much more effective. And they started to look at PAS 55 as well. And Australia was one of the companies that kind of took it up as much as the British did in the UK. But around 2007, just when they were doing the revision of PAS 55, it kind of got recognized that there was a need for a global standard, that PAS 55 was a British specification, but there was something that needed to be a broader standard. And that really led to the development of the ISO 55000 suites in 2014. And that in 2014, for those of you who kind of wondered where this term came from that suddenly appeared on all of our MRO papers and all of our MRO magazines and all of our MRO forums and chats, where did this term come from? It came from the fact that in 2014, ISO 55000 suite was enacted. And what's going to be the future of asset management, and why should people be involved right now? I live in Canada, and so I can speak to what is happening in Canada. And we have some provinces have really created regulations that mandate asset management. In Ontario, again, where I live, it's mandated that all core assets need to have asset management plans by 2021. I think that date may have been extended due to COVID. I'm still not sure if that's been approved. And then it expands to all assets. And so we've got this proliferation of organizations trying to educate the municipalities as to really what is asset management. And, you know, as I said, we're trying to talk about it for 30 minutes, and there are organizations that take weeks and months. As was mentioned, I'm a member of PMAC, the Asset Management Organization of Canada, and we've been teaching for the last 6 years. And when we currently are teaching the municipalities, we have specific courses for them. And just to kind of, you know, kind of reiterate the importance of this, the Federation of the Canadian Municipalities, they're investing in resources, encouraging all municipalities to embrace this asset management, even if it's not regulated, although the feeling is that it will eventually become regulated across Canada. So a little bit about asset management, because many of you may have seen this term. Many of you may have kind of heard the term and wondered exactly what did it mean. And this is a definition of an asset from 55,000. And this is one of the big differentiators between PAS 55 and ISO 55,000. In PAS 55, it was primarily a physical asset management. Anything that has potential or actual value to an organization is an asset. So now we're talking about people, we're talking about reputation, we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about processes that we use, and how do we manage these? So the asset is no longer just that piece of equipment, it's everything that goes around it. And that becomes the difference between maintenance, the MRO world, and asset management. Asset management is just those things that the coordinated activities that realize the value from the assets. And that's the second big change in asset management versus maintenance. Maintenance world, MRO world, we tend to look at it and say, okay, we're going to keep this running as long as we can. You know, we got to keep this running. In asset management, we're going to look at the situation and ask the question, are we deriving value from using this asset? Can we derive more value from using this asset if we do things differently? And it's all about the value to the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do we decide on what that value is. We'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. It's not necessarily a department. And there's lots of discussions out there as to, you know, should this be a department? And my comment always is that to me, it's pretty much the exact same thing as with safety. Yes, I think it's great to have a safety director, and I think it's great to have an asset management director whose job it is to make sure that everyone else understands and is employing safety and understands and employing asset management. Because as the forward-thinking organizations in the safety world have always said, is safety is everyone's job. Asset management is everyone's job. And so it could be a department, and a lot of organizations go that way, the same way as a lot of organizations have a safety department. This is a framework from IAM, Institute of Asset Management in the UK. And this is kind of how we build asset management. And just thought you'd like to see this. And when it starts right at the top with customers, legislation, investors, commercial environment, they're typically gathered up in one word when we talk about asset management, and it's stakeholders. They are where it starts. And when I said, how do we understand what value means to the organization? What it means in value is that it's meeting the stakeholder expectations. And they feed into the organizational strategic plan. And that will describe how and what you're going to do to achieve these objectives. You, in fact, will pull out the objectives in this stage as well. And then we get to, you know, what strategy planning. Then we can look at how do we make decisions and all of these things, and how do we get asset information. But this little circle is kind of where we live now. If we're talking about MRO, you know, how do we acquire, operate, maintain, and dispose, and so on. But what we see in asset management is that we've got all of these other things playing into place against it, you know, risk review, organization, and the people. How do we make sure that all of these things are flowing into this little circle that we live in now? And that really is kind of how things change. So let's have a look at, there are 4 fundamentals in asset management. And the first is that the assets exist to provide value to the organization. And again, it's a change. As I mentioned, it's no longer, okay, can we keep the asset running as long as we can? It's, can we keep the asset running as long as it provides value? And it doesn't look at the value of the asset, it looks at the value that can be derived from that asset. And remember that we're looking at some of the intangible assets, which are not the physical assets, and we have to build that into our process. Next is alignment, and it makes sure that everyone understands how what they do impacts achieving all of those strategic objectives. It takes the intent and make sure that your technical and your financial decisions, that your plans, the activities, all of these things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis are aligned with those strategic goals. It makes sure that when you're making decisions, that they are made based on the organization's strategic objectives. It all comes back to satisfying those stakeholder expectations and requirements. And that's the challenge with it. This was a large differentiator in ISO 55000 when they stated that leadership and workplace culture were determinants of value realization. This was the first ISO standard that came right out and said this. And the ISO committee were adamant that this had to be part of the standard, even though it hadn't been for most others. It had to be there because without having this leadership and this workplace culture, then we're not going to get the commitment that we require and the engagement that we require and the collaboration that we require to have a good asset management system. It won't happen if leadership are not there, and they're not. There are a number of other things that get talked about in leadership to make sure that they are in fact providing the right resources, the right competencies, all of these things. In the ISO standard, it talks more about that, and well worth a look if you haven't seen it, to realize that this is an all-encompassing. It is not a let's take a maintenance department and leave them in the corner. This is everyone gets recognized and everyone gets guided through the leadership and the workplace culture. And then this is where we have always kind of lived, especially on the physical asset management. Is we're there to make the assurance that the assets are fit for purpose. And that's kind of where we need to be. What has been added is this idea of the governance of the process of the organization, and it all goes back to the stewardship between top management and its stakeholders. So the stakeholders have given their requirements, their expectations, and top management have made their commitment, and all of these things need to be in place, and so that we can guarantee or at least assure that the assets are fit for the required purposes, and that purpose is achieving the strategic objectives. We've said the word stakeholders, and the challenge inside the organization, because there are as many stakeholders inside the organization as outside, is that they need to understand their impact on deriving value. And if we think about this, and we think about that model that we had, where we had just management were giving out, but there was nothing coming back. So perhaps they didn't understand the intent. The minimum change that would need is that we would need feedback into current management to show them, tell them what was happening. But if we look at asset management, it's a different model. If we look at it and we say that our driver is asset management, then we've just seen that the executive suite, we've just seen that leadership a determinant of success. And then we can look at people like finance. Do they understand the requirements for capital investment? Do they understand the need, to provide that? ISO 55000 added a section or another document, which is ISO 55010, which talks about the need for different accounting, not principles, but accounting understanding, so that finance would understand that, sure, something may be amortized over 20 years, but operations may say that that asset can provide value for 30 years. And there will be different accounting and there will be different values, but finance need to understand that. And in asset management, it could be that it's maintenance or the reliability or whoever it is, feed this back to finance so that they understand. Then we think about IT. We talked about decision making, and it should be data decision making. So do our IT systems, do they flow? Do they understand each other? Can we get information readily? Or is it a nightmare where we have disparate systems that don't even look at each other? Supply chain, we talked about that. Do supply chain understand what their impact is? We kind of suggested that maybe not, but they need to. And they need to understand how operations are going to require that they operate at a maximum level or an optimum level, and that maintenance are the ones that are going to try and ensure that. And for them to do that, then supply chain need to understand what the maintenance requirements are, and maintenance need to understand what the supply chain restrictions are. And similarly with operations and maintenance, they need to understand each other's points of view and understand that if they don't work together, they're not going to have asset management. And then we've got things like HR. Do we have the right skills and competencies and things like that? Do we have the right training? Then we get sales and marketing involved because they decided that, we're not going to take a shutdown. We're not going to do work. We're going to run loss leaders and everything like that. And then it's a case of, okay, are we really communicating to the stakeholders well? So all of these things need to happen. There need to be this flow in and out, and everyone understanding the other point of view, not how to do the job, but the understanding of the point of view and the impact that they have upon each other. Some changes, demand analysis. I'm going to speed up a little so I don't run too late. Demand analysis, it's not just for the product, but for processes and things like that, spare parts and everything. And this is what changes, this is what changes for maintenance, is that we're not just thinking about today. We're not just thinking about, today's targets. We're thinking about how do we do this for the future? How do we ensure that going forward, we're going to be able to achieve what we need to achieve to meet the stakeholder needs? Are we building in sustainability? Then we need to look at what are the risks? What are the challenges to say, okay, we're going to struggle to reach these strategic objectives. Again, not today, just today, but in the future, are we going to understand that? Do we understand the impact? And risk is done in a number of ways. It flows through ISO 55000 or asset management, where we look at business risk at the high level, and we do tactical risk at the asset level. We may do RCM, we may do FMECAs, whatever it is, but we look at the risks and we develop that based on the stakeholder requirements and based on understanding the impact on other departments. As I mentioned, data decision requires really the integrity of the data and ease of accessibility. Again, we mentioned alignment. Your systems need to be aligned. We move away from looking at things for purchase cost or anything like that. We look at how do we manage over the life cycle. We look at things like life cycle costing. It's not just today's budget. We're looking at how do we go forward over the life cycle of the assets. Slight change in focus in that RCM focus is function, asset management focus is value. The Asset Management Council in Australia have produced this capability delivery model, and it kind of shows that, okay, in this little part, which is the needs analysis, demand analysis, this needs to be communicated throughout. It has to be communicated throughout so that people understand what's going on. Then you get people involved to look at the concept and how we deliver the concept. And then we look at where definitely the MRO, what is currently the MRO group, have to be involved. We look at the specifications, we look at the design, we look at what support do we need for us to be successful, and we get involved at these stages. That doesn't happen too often in today's world, but in asset management, this has to happen so that this group can deliver. But all of this is what allows this group to deliver. This group cannot deliver in isolation, in a silo. And then we have the continuous improvement cycle where we go back and we look at, are we doing what we said we were going to do? The other thing we need is what we mentioned with the alignment, clear line of sight from top to bottom, bottom to top. I know exactly how what I'm doing impacts the strategic objectives, and I know how my neighbors, what their goals are, and I understand what their goals are. And so we have alignment across the organization, and then we have to have consistent monitoring and review. But how do we get this? This is the challenge, and this is where we usually fail. And really, we take the strategic objectives, we think about how we critical success factors are going to allow them, and then think about performance indicators. And then we cascade. And we cascade these strategic objectives. And in this group, we have all of the different little bubbles that we had in our model. We have these so that we all understand how what we're doing in this affects that. And then we take that to our departments and we make sure that, okay, what we're doing is actually supporting this and across the organization. And then to make this work, we have to have measures so that we can see that if we do things right here, we see the success there. If we do things right here, we see the success there. That's how we have to get the collaboration and the cohesiveness throughout the organization and across the organization. So in summary, critical part, MRO is a critical part of asset management, but it's only a part. And we've got to include and collaborate and engage with our partners. If we don't do that, we're not going to be assured to deliver what we need to do. And really, the intent of asset management is simply that we deliver the business outcomes while meeting the stakeholder expectations. You can contact me. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, as you can see. I'm there all the time, and you can get me with either of these two emails. But right now, I'd be happy to take any questions if there were any.
All right, thank you very much, Cliff. For those who don't know, in addition to his many tasks, Cliff also writes asset management articles for MRO Magazine. Be sure to check them out at mromagazine.com. As Cliff mentioned, we now have some time for question and answer. Some that have come in are not many organizations in North America are pursuing ISO 5500 certification. Why is that?
It's a good question, and my opinion on that is that there was no overarching driver or mandate. And what I say that if you think of in the US, if you think about OSHA, everyone in the US is really, really understanding, really, really concerned about OSHA because of it's a mandated effort. In the UK, it was mandated. In Canada, in municipalities, it was mandated. There's no mandate in the US at the moment. The hope was from the ISO 55000 team, especially the American group, was that people like insurance companies would turn around and say, okay, if you're ISO 55000 certified, you're going to get preferential rates. That didn't happen. One organization did start to offer it, but I don't think it's widespread. Strange thing is that in the US, they have the EPA, which have great asset management programs, but they're kind of hidden nobody sees them and nobody understands that they are asset management programs. So I think the biggest challenge is that in North America, we tend to wait and see, and we tend to look at those things that we think that we will do and that will help us. And without a mandated or a regulatory body, and there are groups petitioning Congress to try and get asset management regulated and recognized as a best practice, but have not made any headway. And I think that's what's holding it up.
Are you aware of any oil and gas companies in Canada or the US that have ISO 5500 certification or are working towards it?
No, I'm not aware of it, but in all honesty, I have not gone back to the latest listing. It was short reading. The last time I looked at it, it was very short reading as to organizations that had certified. So the answer to that is I don't know, but they're certainly not publishing it if they are.
Okay. What are the key, easy, and effective steps to follow in order to implement asset management in an organization where all or most assets were run to failure and are now dilapidated?
Then go back to my comments early on is that you probably have to stop the bleeding before you go much further. If everything is run to failure and dilapidated, then it's going to be a challenge because it's going to be a culture change. Again, you can go back and do the basics of looking at saying, okay, what are the values that we're looking at? What is it that we consider to be value? And why are these things not? In an organization that accepts run to failure and accepts that the assets are dilapidated, this is going to be a huge culture change. And so I don't think there are any simple steps. It's back to MRO 101 before you even get to, looking at doing all of these things. It's kind of like saying maybe sometimes you've got to shoot a few alligators before you concentrate on draining the swamp, because the alligator is going to eat you and you're up to your armpits in them. So maybe you got to do stop the bleeding first.
Okay, going back to the ISO 5500, is the list of certified organizations public?
Yes. Yes, you can, and I will dig it up and post it somewhere. Maybe we'll put it in one of the MRO. We'll post it. Yeah, we will post it. I will get the link and post it. Yes.
Okay. Can asset management be bottom-up driven?
It can be, but very tough. And the reason for that is that how does one group, let's assume that you have a maintenance group that really is interested in asset management and wants to drive it and are doing all the best things. How do they enforce collaboration with finance? How do they enforce collaboration with procurement, with IT and all of those things? You're facing the problems that we currently face. And that's the reason that the ISO team said that leadership and culture will be the determinants of success. If the culture is such that people are accepting of it, then yes, it can be kind of bottom driven up. But the reality is it seldom is that way. The culture is seldom that way where, one group can affect a lot of other groups.
Okay. What will be the biggest challenge for people who want to use asset management?
Probably culture change. Because what we see, especially in North America, I'll speak more about North America. In North America, what we see is that the old model is is the way that most organizations operate, and it will involve culture change. And what we mean by changing culture is that you're starting to change your measurements. You're starting to change goals. You're starting to change behaviors, and you're starting to change a lot of things. And another thing that we don't necessarily do extremely well in North America is change management. We just say we'll change and expect it to happen. So that's a challenge.
Okay. Are there published statistics about the impact of poor store practices? For example, the 25% mentioned of purchase cost is being to cost to store.
I don't know of a published, no. All that we talk about is anecdotal and surveys that we've done as a consulting company. There are documents and articles that will, for instance, describe how that 25% is made up. But again, it's as with everything in maintenance, averages are really not the best indicator. So it would be far better to look inward and sort of look at, okay, we have an inventory. How much has not been used in 1 year, 5 years, ever, all of these things, and look at that yourself and see, where do you sit on that?
Okay. Can asset management strategy run concurrently with RCM? What are the differences between the two? How are they related?
Okay, RCM is a way of developing your maintenance strategy. That's what RCM does. It allows you to develop a maintenance strategy for your assets, and that fits very, very nicely into asset management. What was the first part?
What are the differences between the two, and how are they related?
Yeah, the strategic asset management plan is all inclusive. It's how we are going to take the strategic objectives and how we are going to turn it, and it will involve all departments. It won't just be the maintenance world. It will be how we'll for instance, we may have something that will say that in our decision making, we will look at climate change. We will look at green. We will do all of these things and make all of those decisions. Whereas RCM is how to develop your maintenance strategies. And it fits, absolutely fits in with that, with a strategic asset management plan. If we saw the model, the strategic asset management plan was outside influencing else, RCM fits in that nice circle.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Suppose you have an organization that spans the entire country. For example, a government-owned company with spatial complexity. How is AM implemented effectively in such a scenario? What structural framework will assist?
What will assist will be having consistent and clear documentation and guidance from head office. If you want, if I think back to my role as the corporate reliability maintenance person, we were the owners of the asset management program. And at each of the sites, there was somebody who was designated or volunteered or trained in asset management and how to monitor that. But the whole idea was, again, that it was done so that everyone understood. Now, maybe you have one person, but you have everyone understanding their part in achieving asset management. It can be done. You will find, again, different cultures in different areas, and that will provide different challenges. And so that requires somebody, typically somebody from the head office, who would then troubleshoot, would then help out, would then guide, would understand what the different challenges were. And you have the opportunity of having other people learn very, very quickly through one person's challenge, becomes then a learning opportunity for a whole bunch of other places. But it's you have to have your program clearly documented and set up. It can't be just a flavor of the month or just something that people would like to do.
Okay, let's squeeze one more question in. Are there provisions within the method to deal with international logistics, considering recent events of lengthy delays on delivery?
Yes, and they are, that example is a really good reason why risk management is throughout asset management, and risk management has to be dynamic. And that's the challenge that, again, we see is that a lot of organizations will think that risk management is one and done. Yes, we've got a risk register and we moved on. Okay, but what happened in COVID? What happened with the shortage of chips? What happened? What we didn't look at that risk. We didn't evaluate that risk and figure out what we need to do. So the risk portion of asset management is where you would take that into consideration.
Okay, now if a company is profitable, why would they want to change to asset management?
Sustainability, and that's it. Asset management is not something new. The title is something new, but it's not something new. There are organizations that have been very, very successful in doing this without calling it asset management. The problem was that in the UK, it didn't happen. And so it proliferated the need for asset management. And what we've seen, I had a good friend who asked me exactly that same question. And he came back about 6 months later and said, now I understand why we need asset management, because yeah, you have the odd company that does things really well, but the vast majority, they can definitely benefit from it. But sustainability and having some sort of, again, structure around making sure you go forward.
Okay, thank you once again, Cliff, for a very informative session and answering all the questions.
No, it's my pleasure. It's great to be here, and thank you everyone for listening.